Hello, everybody, and welcome into the Apples and Genos Fantasy Hockey Podcast. My name is Nate Groot-Niblink. I'm the creator of Apples and Genos, originator of the Zero G draft strategy, and in this podcast, Blake and I are going to talk about the biggest hot shots and have-nots of the past week since the All-Star game. Let's get it. Now, of course, I have your friend and my best friend that you can offend but can't comprehend, Blake Creamer, here with me. Blake, how are we feeling tonight?
All right, you know what? I'm here for all these new intros, buddy. This is really adding a nice layer to our podcast here. I really enjoy that, buddy. I'm doing very well. It's Sunday, only two games in the NHL, two games in the NBA. I don't know, slow sports day. Not a lot going on.
Yeah,
right?
definitely nothing happening.
Buddy, I could give a crap about the Super Bowl this year. I don't know. I mean, I like football. I mean, I like sporting events. I'm like Taylor Swift. Like, go sports. You know what I mean? That's what I'm about. I'm like Rob Lowe. But yeah, I just can't get into it this year. I don't know. It's just not me. I don't know. Are you a big football guy? Oh, of course you are. Yeah. What am I talking about? Are you watching some of this? Are you aware of what's going on? Or
Yeah, I'm into football. I'm unfortunately a Denver Broncos fan, so
right.
yeah, watching Kansas City be in the Super Bowl year after year after year is not exactly my idea of a good time. And unfortunately, as we're recording this, they're in the lead again going into the fourth quarter. But yeah, overall, I will watch it when it's on, but I'm not opposed to not watching it and doing a fantasy hockey podcast when it's Patrick Mahomes and company in the Super Bowl yet again for the 72nd time. So, yeah, that's about where I'm at with it at this moment in time.
Yeah, you're damn skippy. All right. This is what's important, people. All right. Not the
Exactly.
Taylor Swift show with the side of football. All right. Here we are. We're ready to
Absolutely.
rock. Let's get to business.
Let's do it. Let's start with some newsies. We're gonna start in San Jose, where apparently there is still news that can come out of San Jose. You might have been
I
questioning
heard
this,
that.
but
Yeah, I heard
apparently
that.
it is true. Yep. Logan Couture and Thomas Hurdle both day to day, and their status for Wednesday's contest against the Jets is in question. So, yeah, if they miss, then it is really, really slim pickings in San Jose. Other than their normal state is really slim pickings, and now we've progressed to really, really slim pickings if both those guys miss. So,
So
uh,
descriptive.
very descriptive. I have all the words, many words. Many people have said this about me. John Gibson left Friday's game with an injury. Was back on the ice today, so it looks like he's good to go. Big news in the NHL. Everybody was debating this on Twitter. Morgan Riley gonna get a suspension for sure. Cross-checked Ridley Greig at the end of last night's game after Greig decided to slap shot into an empty net. And yeah, obviously, if Riley misses time, you're looking at somebody coming up to take that top power play spot. Toronto has toyed with, 5 forward power plays in the past. I don't think that that's the most likely scenario. I think the most likely scenario is probably Timothy Liljegren, who's been on the second power play the most out of any of their other defensemen throughout the season. So that's actually kind of an interesting look, obviously, if Liljegren does get that look. But yeah, obviously keep an eye out on practice lines and see what you get there. As far as the suspension goes, we'll find out. I think tomorrow probably we'll get a ruling on the suspension. I mean, he was offered an in person hearing, which gives them the option to give him a suspension of more than 5 games. If he gets that, that would be wild, in my opinion. There are whole YouTube videos dedicated to how many cross checks to the head there have been in the last number of years. This is a thing that happens once every 10 games, and few of them get suspended, and the ones that do are usually a couple of games or something. So, anyway, Toronto effect, I guess Riley could get more, but definitely if he does get more, then you're looking at actually a pretty decent option in whoever fills in for him in the top power play in Toronto. Victor Arvidsson going to travel with LA for their upcoming road trip. Hope is he gets in at some point, but still a little bit up in the air. Probably the best bet is that he misses a game or two at the start here. So you're going to have to really be on it if you want to actually be actively streaming him in this week. He's definitely not going to get all 4 games unless something really changes tomorrow. So be on the lookout for that because there's definitely some potential there with Arvidsson if he is available in your league, but and doesn't look like it'll be right away. Nathan McKinnon did kind of fall on his face in the last game, has some sort of injury. There was some sort of laceration he was getting worked on. No real update there. Hopefully nothing more serious. Obviously, the NHL is much better when McKinnon is plying his trade within it. So hopefully he's back and that doesn't negatively affect everyone in Colorado because McKinnon's been single-handedly trying to will that team to victories this year for sure. Shea Theodore is finally located. He was MIA for quite some time, but he was seen skating in a non-contact jersey with the team. So, we don't have a clear timeline here. So he's probably still got some time to work out with the team, get into some contact practices, and get back into a game. So it's probably at least a week, if not more, but definitely a good sign. And probably the end of the Alec Martinez and Danil Maramanov experiments on the top power play there in Vegas. Lastly, here, Antti Ranta out a week or two. RBA, I guess, deemed the injury not that serious, but Ranta is made of glass, as we all know. So, I mean, it was going to be Kochekov's net, I think, either way. I don't think Ranta was posing a serious threat to Kochekov at this point. But either way, good news for Kochekov rosterers at this point. Anything here, Blake? Anything I missed?
No, not at all. Just that Ridley Grieg is a dingus. We were talking a little bit offline, but I think players, like, if you play hockey, then I think you can understand like what Ridley Grieg did deserved a response, right? There needs to be a response there. A cross check to the face. No. All right. Morgan Riley, shame on you. All right. That's not what you do, buddy, but definitely a response. So I'm here for that. But it'll be interesting to see what happens there in Toronto.
For sure. All right, let's get into the meat of the episode here and talk about some of these hot shots. So for this, I wanted to focus really on what happened since the All-Star game. Whenever these breaks happen in the NHL schedule, I do kind of view it as a little bit of a reset from the previous stats. I try not to, oftentimes I'll talk about the last 5 games as a sample size for these players as an indication of how they're currently performing. If they're, feeling it, firing lots of pucks, that's obviously a good sign, something that you like to see from players that you're considering picking up or trading for. But when you have an instance like this where you have just this huge break in the schedule, I do try not to try to use games from before and after and mash them together and say, this is my sample size, because I feel like those are just so different. Like, guy could be injured before, and getting those 5 days off is like the best thing that could ever happen to him, and he comes back totally refreshed and he's a brand new hockey player after that. Lots of things can change when you have like a full week off like the players did. So yeah, in totality, I'm really just kind of looking right now for my fantasy, all the picks that I'm making, the ads that I'm making for the upcoming week. I'm really most concentrated on what they've done in the last few games since the All-Star break, and that's what we're going to look at here. So we'll start with John Tavares here, who is obviously somebody that we've talked about as being a bit of a have-not at multiple points throughout the season. But in the 3 games since the All-Star break, he's got 2 goals, 5 points, 11 shots in those 3 games. Absolutely doing the thing at the moment is John Tavares. What do you think, Blake? I know that we had talked about him as buy low. Feels like we're vindicated here now. Now that we have some of this positive regression finally hitting for John Tavares, what's the upside for the rest of the season? What do you think is the ceiling case for the point pace rest of the season?
Yeah, sure. Well, first off, I'm very happy to see Tavares here. I think it really was a no-brainer to me with what he was doing. like the shot and chance generation, the minutes, the power play deployment. Like it, he's only 33. He's not old man Withers. So we knew that was going to come back. But right now, yeah, he's back up to a 66-point pace. I think, 70-point pace rest of the season seems reasonable to me for Tavares, and might be a little bit on the low end, right? If there are things that could go right, that could, he's got a ceiling for more, maybe an 80-point ceiling, but I think everything would have to go right there. And the Leafs would have to get hot and start playing a little better, right? They've had a little bit of a lull in their season, but I really do like what you said about starting fresh from the All-Star break. And like, this is a player that massively benefited from that. I wouldn't be surprised if he was battling a small injury that was nagging, that was causing, an effect in his game, because he's looked a lot better. And again, just the shot generation has been great for Tavares. So it's a player I'm excited about. So excited, in fact, that I traded him in Kakupful straight up for Tage Thompson. And I missed out on all of these, all of this nice little stuff that Tavares has been doing here in the last few games. But, I'm going to ride with Big Tage for a little bit. But yeah, I like Tavares' outlook rest of the season for sure.
Yeah, it's interesting when you look at Tavares on the season. On the season, he's pacing for 25 goals, 66 points. As we've mentioned previously, like, all of his individual and on-ice stats have been elite for the entire season. 10th in the league in shots per 60, 5th in individual scoring chances, 4 per 60, 16th in on-ice Corsi, 4 per 60, 9th in on-ice scoring chances, 4 per 60, averaging over 18 minutes a game. The IPP at just 58%. He has never been below 62% in his career. I'm just looking through his season stats. So that's definitely the lowest of his career if it sticks, and most likely settle somewhere in the mid 60s. So he's got some positive regression potentially there. The shooting percentage, 8.1%. He's typically an 11 to 13% shooter, somewhere in that range. So he's got some positive regression there. The on ice shooting percentage, 10.8%. The last two seasons, it's been 12.2% in both of the last two seasons. He's getting more Corsi 4 per 60 this year, same amount of scoring chances 4 per 60 this year. Like, there's just no reason to be out on John Tavares at this point. There was a point in where we were kind of looking at it and we were saying, okay, the individual numbers were starting to fall off a little bit, but then they came back strong, and that's when we felt really secure that, there's nothing going on here. Tavares is just having a cold streak. Pucks aren't going in, posts, whatever. Pucks aren't going in. They will eventually, and I do believe that Tavares has every chance of being a point per game player rest of season in my mind. All right, another player that we're super excited to have scoring some points. Once again, Alex Ovechkin, who has 4 goals and 5 points in his 4 games since the All-Star break here, including 16 shots on goal, averaging 4 shots a game. We love to see it from Alex Ovechkin, 25th in shots per 60 in this stretch. So he's definitely up there. Still not generating a ton of individual scoring chances for, which is a little bit concerning to me, because he's always typically done that. He's not been like at the absolute top of the league necessarily as he's aged in those categories, but it's a defined downward trend this year in the individual scoring chances 4 per 60. So I would say that, you can expect that the shooting percentage might not be quite as good this year as in years past, but I mean, he's still on the season shooting only 7.8% even after this great week that he's had. So definitely he's still got some ceiling from that point to improve. And still, I mean, he is absolutely checking pucks. 11th in individual shot attempts per 60 on the season is Ovechkin. And realistically, I think the Capitals are going to find themselves in a situation where they are going to want to get Ovechkin that goal record, and they're gonna let him cook as far as that's concerned, and that may or may not be the kind of primary outcome that they're the most concerned with at some point here in the not too distant future for the Capitals. So I'm all aboard the Ovechkin train. Never really left the Ovechkin train. I will say that definitely, like, relative to where I projected him at the beginning of the season, I've adjusted that expectation for the rest of the season, but I still think he's going to be a terrific fantasy asset. I've traded for him in Kakupful. I traded Kevin Fiala for him. I'm feeling pretty good about that at the moment. Overall, I'm just in on Ovechkin, maybe not to the extent that we had hoped for at the beginning of the season, but still as a very, very solid fantasy asset. What do you think, Blake?
Yeah, I like all of that. It's interesting in this 5 goals in 5 games. obviously he scored, the second most goals in history, but these 5 goals here, they're probably like 5 of the worst goals he's ever scored. I know he did rip one that was a slapper, but like one of them was an empty net goal that he just like slugged into the net. Like it's this isn't vintage Ovechkin, everybody, but it
Yeah.
is. We knew the shooting percentage was going to come up. It had to, right? But yeah, you're right. It's so interesting with that individual scoring chances for, and I wonder. I think that's either age related, so maybe they're like a true decline, right? Like he's still able to chuck pucks, right? But he's not able to get to those spots as easily. Or I wonder if this goal scoring thing is really affecting him mentally, right? Like he might be forcing it a little bit, right? Obviously, he knows he needs to shoot. He knows that's his weapon, but like maybe he's doing things that he hasn't typically done throughout his career, right? Just to get shots on net. And, his team's fighting for a playoff spot. So maybe he's gripping the stick a little bit more than he usually does. Cause that is interesting, right? Last 5 games, 25th overall in shots goal per 60, but 353rd in scoring chances for. That's what do you say with it? Like he's truly chucking pucks and he doesn't care from where. So that all said, I'm so glad to see that Ovechkin is, his name's back on our tongue right now. Like this guy's such a beauty. I like the team dynamic in Washington too. You ever see any like behind the scenes stuff with like Tom Wilson, TJ Oshie, and Ovechkin, like all their pregame antics and
Yep.
shenanigans? Like they just all seem like beauties, and Ovechkin is one of the all-time beauties. So I like what you said too. I think that his team, especially if they kind of really fall off that race, like have no chance of the wild card, they're just going to let him cook. As if he's not injured, he's going to be out there trying to get these goals. So I think that's going to help us big time in fantasy.
Absolutely. Let's roll over to Calgary and talk about some interesting things going on over there. So, we do have a couple of players here in the 3 games since the All Star break cooking up 5 points in those 3 games. Kadri has 5 assists, and Huberdeau has 2 goals and 3 assists for 5 points of his own in that stretch. So let's do a little compare and contrast here, Blake. Of the two, they're getting roughly the same minutes, playing on different lines, but both on the top power play. Let's do a little would you rather rest of the season. What do you think? Do you think this is sustainable from either one of them? Maybe not, to 5 points in every 3 games, but do you think either one of these are showing something that has you a little bit more intrigued than you would be otherwise?
If I had to choose between the two, it'd be Kadri for sure. And it's so weird to say when we're talking about Jonathan Huberdeau because we know what he did 2 years ago and the epic fall off, and he's fallen off even more. Since last year, he's on a 50-point pace this year after 55 last year. This is just crazy stuff. But as you said, like big time signs of life. It's really nice to see. His confidence is back a little bit. And the truth is, Huberdeau is one of the best passers in the league. There's no question there. It's just, the other stuff surrounding his game has really kind of gone to crap, right? I'm always going to take in this situation the guy that's shooting more and getting more chances. And Kadri is getting more ice time as well, right? And they're both on power play 1. So this one, I would absolutely just go with the metrics, right? And Kadri to me is, he doesn't have any goals in his last 5 games, but he's shooting a ton, or he's shooting more, right? And on the season, he's 40th overall on shots to goal per 60. So this is a guy that does like to shoot. So that shooting percentage, he's not going to continue to shoot 0%, right? So he's got some goals on the way. He's getting some assists. Maybe he's got the big Kuzi bump. I don't know. Anyone who has access to Kuzmenko is about to pop off. But yeah, it's great news for the Flames. I love that they're not just packing it in. Like they've actually put some real good games together here. I've got Markstrom in a bunch of spots. He's been playing great. So yeah, it'll be neat to see what the Flames do moving forward. But if they're going to have any success, they need both these guys cooking.
For sure. I do in general agree. So I would take Kadri over Huberto rest of season points, categories, league bangers, whatever really your format is. I would take Kadri over Huberto. The one thing that's got me a little bit concerned is at the moment Kadri is skating 5-on-5 with Pospisil and Zary, and Huberto's getting Sharangovich and Kuzmenko, which is obviously a more offensive line. So yeah, I don't really know what to make of that exactly. I don't obviously also there's every chance that these lines will change before the next game that Calgary plays as well. So take that for what it's worth. But overall, that's really the only thing giving me some pause in choosing Kadri over Huberto at the moment. I think we mentioned it before, but like Kadri and Huberto have actually played really well together.
Yeah.
So I think that would be a kind of logical route for them to go as well. We'll see, obviously, moving forward. But I do think that Kadri is the most projectable of the two. Huberdeau certainly has the potential to outscore Kadri at any given time. We've seen that potential in the National Hockey League, but we've not seen that potential in Calgary at any moment. And Kadri has actually been playing really well all year, 40th in shots per 60 on the season, 62nd in on ice Corsi 4 per 60. So even with all of Calgary's struggles, well documented throughout the season, Kadri's actually crafted himself a pretty nice season overall, pacing 469 points. So that's my take on Kadri versus Huberdeau. We got to talk about Nick Suzuki, Blake. Why don't you start while I work myself up to this? What's your current take on Nick Suzuki? He's had quite the run. If you go back, I know I said we weren't going to talk about before the All Star break, but if you do go back before the All Star break, over his last 5 games, he's got 5 goals and 9 points. Absolutely popping the hell off. So, what do we do with Suzuki? And yeah, I'll work myself up to give my response later.
That's right. I mean, Nate is, maybe not always the most expressive man in the world, but that's about as depressed as I've ever heard Nate sound when he has to. Well, I guess we have to talk about Nick Suzuki. Yeah, I guess we do. This guy's got 11 points in 7 games. Damn, against all odds. You know how he's doing it. He's shooting 62.5% over his last 5 games. Yeah, that'll do it. I think so. But yeah, nothing has really changed with Suzuki, has it, Nate? Like, it's all, the metrics are all the same, and they're garbage, right? He doesn't shoot, he doesn't generate chances, he doesn't chuck pucks, right? But he's out on the ice for like 22 minutes a game. And one thing that Nick Suzuki is really, really good at, he's a great power play performer. And Nate and I were talking about this the other day. This guy, in 52 games, he's already got his career high in power play points this year. He's already at 23 power play points. So, I mean, that's huge, right? That is the biggest difference in his point total. Right now, he's got 48 points in 52 games. That's a 76-point pace. That would be a career high for Nick Suzuki. And yeah, if he continues to cook on the power play like this, like, he'll get there. I have absolutely no doubt that he'll get there. I think 70 is probably a little more, that's kind of reasonable to me if he continues with this deployment and if he continues popping off the power play. But for that to happen, he's going to have to continue to be one of, if not the most efficient player in the NHL, and also have his line mates continue to cook, right? Cole Caulfield, Mike Matheson, Yuri Slavkovsky's going to have to score more, right? Like, and these guys don't have great metrics either, besides the professor, Mike Matheson, right? And Caulfield, what am I talking about? But yeah, it's just not a player I'll ever be excited about, and I've never had him, actually. So if I did have him, though, I'd be super stoked, because this, to me, is peak Nick Suzuki. This is why you drafted him, really, and things are coming to fruition, but everything has to go right for him to maintain it.
Yeah. When you talk about a player like this, 75% IPP, typically the last 3 years, he's been between 64 and 68%. So he's outperforming there. Shots were 60, right in line with the last 3 years. Shooting percentage, 14.7%. Last year, he was 16%. Years before that, he was below 14%. So yeah, maybe this is about where he should be there. Maybe it's still a little bit high if you look at a career average there. Individual scoring chances 4 per 60, right in line with career numbers. The on ice numbers are actually up, and it is because of that power play being much more dangerous this year than it has been in years past. The on ice shooting percentage, I feel, at 10.9% is probably about in line with where it should be. So overall, the season long pace, 27 goals, 76 points, I feel like it's a little rich, but I could be convinced that it's not that rich, probably around a 70-point pace. I mean, he's getting, yeah,
Wow.
like you're saying, between 21 and 22 minutes a night. Anybody who's a competent player getting power play one and all that, yeah, getting all these minutes is definitely going to have a chance to produce 70 points in the National Hockey League. So I do think that he's, yeah, just never. I don't see a scenario basically in which Nick Suzuki goes off for the rest of the season and scores at like a 90-point pace. I just don't think that scenario's there. And there is downside where he gets really cold again and he scores at like a 50, 55-point pace for the rest of the season. That's like the downside scenario if the efficiency starts to go away and the metrics fall off just a little bit, because he's living on that razor edge of max efficiency
Yep.
relative to what he's been able to do in his career before. So that's the part that obviously scares you a little bit about Nick Suzuki. If you can move off him for somebody else, maybe somebody with a better playoff schedule, then that's definitely a move that I would explore at this point. But I do think that Suzuki is probably a relatively safe bet, all things considered, just given the sheer amount of ice time that he's going to command in Montreal for the rest of the season. Okay, let's move on to that absolute stud, Kyle Palmieri. Kyle Palmieri is just absolutely doing the thing, just going off in terms of
Love
the
this.
underlying metrics. It's honestly one of the more interesting things I've seen in a while. So in the 3 games since the All-Star break, he's got a goal and 2 assists for 3 points, so point per game through there. That's nice. But he's got 11 shots in those 3 games, 21 shot attempts. So 7 shot attempts a game is Palmieri, and 12 individual scoring chances for. So 4 individual scoring chances for per game is Kyle Palmieri. If you're wondering, yes, that is a very, very good number to have. Yeah, so Palmieri is one of the league leaders over the last number of games now in terms of the shots and the chance generation. Even the on ice numbers are really high up there. Is playing on the top power play on the New York Islanders and then on the Brock Nelson line at even strength. So he's got some decent deployment. It's working out to roughly 17 and a half minutes on the season. He's averaging a touch over 17 minutes. So what's his story on Kyle Palmieri? I kind of, in the waiver wire episode, we touched on briefly, and I was kind of like, yeah, we know who Kyle Palmieri is. He's this guy, and, he's having a nice run. Do you feel differently at this point, Blake? Like, he has had like a pretty sustained run, and he came back from the All-Star game just on an absolute bender here. So what's your thoughts on Palmieri at the moment?
I don't really feel too different, to be honest. I mean, this is a nice stretch, but we're still only talking about 5 games, right? We're looking at 5 games. Yeah, he was playing well before that too, right? I mean, this guy's, what is his point pace? Like, yeah, 49-point pace. That's the type of player that Kyle Palmieri is. You know what I mean? Like, he's 33 years old. You don't just all of a sudden change your game and now you're this shot monster. Like, he's having a good stretch and he's feeling it for sure. And you could also argue that, having Patrick Waugh there, a new coach, like, maybe he's found something in Palmieri. He's triggered something. He's getting him to play a different way, putting him in more offensive situations, but still at the end of the day, it's Kyle Palmieri. All right. This guy's shotgunning monsters in the dressing room. He's coming out, he's holding his feelings inside. I don't know. I'm just mentioning a Kyle. That's, I don't know, Kyle, Karen, where I'm going with that. I don't know. Anyways, it's a nice stretch. And to me, this guy's a streamer with benefits. So you pick him up when the Islanders have a great schedule. It was interesting because I was talking with someone just helping them with their waiver wire ads coming up for next week. And they had Kyle Palmieri. And yeah, they only have a 2-game week, right? But they play on the Sunday, which is a really light Sunday. And like, I had to think for a second and be like, okay, yeah, drop Kyle Palmieri. But I was like, well, that doesn't feel very good. This guy's cooking right now. You know what I mean? So I'd like to have him when he's, in the fire like he is right now. But this is not something I expect for the rest of the season. I do expect him to be at a 50-point pace here and probably finish the season that way. But it's a nice spot. And he's doing well on the power play too. Nice little resurgence there. 14 power play points this year after only 5 last year. So yeah, he's found his spot on power play 1, and that looks locked down. And the Islanders are a little more offensive this year. So, that's where I'm at with him. Not too interested, but it's a nice little story.
Yeah, I can't say I disagree all that much. The one thing I will say is like the new coach effect there does seem to be kind of real at the moment with
Yep.
Patrick Waugh coming in and taking the reins. It does seem like he's, at least in the short term here, been able to motivate the team to new heights. And it seems like I think there was a Barzal quote that he's like, man, I just want to run through a brick wall for this
Yeah,
guy.
I
Like,
love that.
it's something, right? Like, you don't want to totally discount that. So I'm not discounting the fact that there could be a little bit higher of a ceiling for Palmieri rest of season than the 49-point pace he's currently on. But realistically, like, the absolute max I'll give you is like 60, right? Like, I
Oh
just
my.
can't
Oh
see.
my.
I can't see Palmieri pacing beyond that for the rest of the season, if I'm being honest with everybody here. So that's my take on Palmieri. I do want to talk about Erik Karlsson. Erik Karlsson has been a bit maligned this season, so I just wanted to highlight him here and give him some props because Erik Karlsson has 14 points in his last 14 games. And it just doesn't get talked about. I think everybody still views this guy as an absolute disappointment. He's on a 62-point pace on the season. His underlying metrics are all terrific. And quite honestly, I think he could even grow from this point and go beyond that. I know we've mentioned him as a potential buy low. I think that window's probably passed with this streak that he's been on the last number of games. But if there is still a chance to buy low on Erik Karlsson, I would absolutely explore it, because I do think that this is a guy who's scoring a ton of points and even has some ability to put up some more from here on out. I know they're running this kind of odd power play system where Malkin and Karlsson are on the second power play unit away from Crosby, who's obviously the player you want to be around for fantasy purposes right now in Pittsburgh. But what's your take, Blake? Do you think 62 is the benchmark rest of the season, or do you think he's got room to grow?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, yeah, it's probably floor to me. Like, it's not like the ceiling is going to go that much higher unless they really start leaning into him and getting him power play one, right? If he gets back on power play one, then we could see a 70-point ceiling. But I think 60 points, Erik Karlsson, that's good enough, right? Like, yeah, it's maybe a little bit disappointing. Like, I know I didn't draft him where he was being drafted because it was a little bit rich for me, right? We knew he was a regression candidate after 100 points, right? Of course. The Pittsburgh, they can't just have him out there just skating around, playing shinny, try and dipsy doodle everybody like for 100 points. No. So we knew there was going to be a change here, but 60 seems reasonable to me. But I'm glad you're bringing them up because yeah, it's expectations are killers, aren't they? Like, you draft this guy and you're like, oh, another 100 points. Come on. It's like, you know how hard it is for defensemen to get 100 points? I mean, that's a once in a lifetime thing for this guy. He's never going to come close to that again. But 60 to 65 points, I'm here for it. I actually traded for Karlsson in the A and G Listener Dynasty League. I picked him up. I can't remember the trade, but it was a buy low for sure. And I've been happy with the return so far. I think this is an absolutely reasonable pace moving forward.
All right. I do want to talk about the Calgary defensemen. So we got two guys here who classify as hot shots, and then one other guy who I think we would classify as a have not, but we'll maybe use this as the segue between the two elements of the podcast here. Noah Hannafin has 1 goal, 3 assists in the 3 games Calgary's played since the All-Star break. So he's got 4 points here, including 9 shots. Nice little piece of work. He's got 19 shot attempts in those 3 games, which is pretty intense stuff. And then you've got Mackenzie Weegar, who popped off for a hat trick on Saturday. He's got 8 shots of his own, 16 shot attempts in those 3 games. So he's been firing pucks on goal as well. And then you've got Rasmus Andersson, who's done pretty much nothing. So moving forward, you've got Hannafin on the top power play right now. They have played around with this. It seems like they've just always kind of just defaulted back to Rasmus Andersson at some point, and he's gotten the majority of the work there on the season for sure. But I don't know. Hannafin having a good run here. Seems like he might hang on to this for a little bit longer. How would you kind of rate these defenseman here rest of the season, Blake? Like, just assume points. I think maybe Weegar gets the edge in bangers formats because of what he's able to do in terms of hits and blocks and stuff. But just in terms of point, kind of a standard points league, let's say like a couple points set up, get some weight for bangers, but you definitely got to be able to score to put up points in that system as well. How would you rank these guys rest of the season? Let's start there.
Yeah, interesting question. For sure, Andersson and Hannafin, they're kind of like the same to me. So I would basically lean whoever's getting power play one. I know that's kind of a chintzy answer, but with those 2 players in particular, whoever's getting power play one is the one I'm interested in, right? Because when Hannafin is not on power play one, he's basically what Andersson is right now, and vice versa. They've kind of shown that, and I tend to think that Andersson is going to get power play one back. I mean, he's had it for most of the year. Hannafin's had it for 3 games, right? Albeit, 3 good games, and the Flames have played very well in those games. So maybe that buys him a little bit of time on the power play. So currently, oh yeah, and then we got to throw Weegar in there. All right, so Weegar, first, this guy leads the league in goals for a defenseman. Did you know that?
Yeah.
Weegar, what? How?
We were just a year late, Blake. We were just a year late.
How you doing that? This is wild stuff. But yeah, I think Weegar is redlining to a ridiculous degree. I mean, his shooting percentage is obscene, 11.6 on the season. No. All right. This is a career 5.7 shooter it's going to regress. He's not going to continue to get these goals. He's on a 50-point pace himself, Uyghur. So to answer your question, Nate, I currently, as they are right now, I would go Hannafin, Uyghur, Anderson. That's probably how I'd like to do it, because I think Hannafin has the best upside for offense. And I think offense is a lot harder to get on the wire, or, just in general, right? So this guy's got that locked down. Uyghur, obviously, in Bangers Cats, he's taking over the number one spot, no question. But that's sort of how I'd rank it here. But to me, Hannafin and Anderson, they can, swap anytime Anderson gets power play one back. Where are you at?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. It's really close to me between all three. Like Hannafin has outplayed Anderson this year, in my opinion. Um, and I don't think it's actually particularly close. Anderson has kept pace and been a better fantasy asset marginally, just
Yep.
due to the fact that he's been on the power play one and has gotten some more points that way. But definitely at even strength, Hannafin's outplayed him, and so is Uyghur for that matter. Uyghur 15th in shots per 60 amongst all defensemen on the season, so he's at least been bombing shots, and that,
Love
shots
that.
plus the shooting percentage is how you get to being the most goals for any defenseman on the season. Basic math there for you. I'll do that for you for free.
Thank
But
you.
on the rest of the season, like I do think Anderson gets back there at some point, but I'm not even sure it matters. And I feel like Uyghur, just the overall profile he's presenting, the amount that he's shooting, I think he'll, like, in a points only league where you're only counting the number of points that they're going to score rest of the season, then maybe I'd go away from Uyghur. But I think I would take Uyghur over the other two at this point, in anything that weighs any kind of peripherals, basically. So I would take Uyghur over the other two. And then, yeah, honestly, I think you could probably flip a coin between Hannafin and Anderson at this point. I agree that I do think Anderson gets back on the top power play at some point, but Hannafin has kind of kept pace with him, even
Yeah.
regardless of that. So I guess I would take Anderson over Hannafin, but I don't feel strongly about that one for sure. All right. We've made it to the end of the hot shots and thrown in an extra have not for free. Let's talk about the Apples and Junos Discord server, which you should definitely join if you're looking for lots of people to talk fantasy hockey with. We've got over 1,000 people in there just talking fantasy hockey all day and all night, all the time. Great place to be if you want to get some people's opinions on what you should be doing. If you want my opinion, you can check out the Apples and Ginos Patreon, $5 a month, and I'll answer any question you have about your team. For $10 a month, I'll throw in a team review for you and get that done for you as well. While you're here, if you could be so kind as to like, subscribe on the YouTube, give us a rating or review on podcast, we would definitely appreciate that as well. And if you are interested in getting daily summaries of what's gone on in the NHL, you definitely should just go over to applesandgenos.com and just check out what Mark Barber, 18 Skaters on Twitter, is putting up on a daily basis. It's just terrific stuff, really easy to read information about all the biggest performers of the last night in fantasy hockey. Basically, everything that you could need to know will be in those daily summaries. So definitely check that out if you need somebody to just kind of quickly break down the games and you don't want to go box score hunting through all the games, especially on those heavy nights. It's just a great resource for stuff like that. All right, Blake, are you ready for some have nots?
Let's do it.
All right, let's start off with Mr. Ryan Nugent Hopkins. This has not been a great stretch coming back. I don't know if anybody's truly worried about Nugent Hopkins. If anything, I feel like people are like just oddly over bullish on Nugent Hopkins all the
Mhm.
time. They just figure that the McDavid and Draisaitl exposure will always equal like perfection for Ryan Nugent Hopkins. But he does not have a point since returning from the All-Star break. He's got 6 shots in that time frame. Where do you sit with Nugent Hopkins at this point? He's on a 21 goal, 75-point pace. This is a player that we were all expecting a ton of regression for. Has the regression swung too far? Are you expecting him to come back up at this point? What do you think, Blake?
I don't expect anything. I think this is exactly where we saw RNH going this year, and it makes total sense, right? There's going to be peaks and valleys for sure, but this guy got 37 goals last year. That was never going to stick. That was on 18.4 shooting percentage, a career high. I mean, 53 power play points, folks. That's not happening this year, right? He's at 17 right now. He's still like 75-point pace. That's great. He could hit point per game, right? Just because he has access to that, ridiculous power play unit there at Edmonton, and they could really catch fire and he can get a bunch of points, no question. But 75 points, I'm here for it, right? This guy's got 0 points in 3 games. He'll be fine, right? Edmonton, the streak is broken. So they're kind of, 2 losses in 3 games. They're just kind of getting their feet back under them here. But I'm not concerned at all. This guy's situation is solid. His ice time is crazy good, right? He's playing over 20 minutes a game, top 6. What's not to like, right? And I think he has a little bit of his shooting percentage is a little bit low for him, so he could have a few more goals coming to him. But 75-point pace, that's where I see him rest of the season, and I would be absolutely happy if I drafted RNH at value where I think value is, and he's getting a 75-point season. I'd be stoked.
Yep. Yeah, I think that's fair. I was just looking back. I had him projected for 29 goals, 80 points. And as I mentioned, he's on pace for 21 goals, 75 points. I do think the shooting percentage could be a little bit higher. The on-ice shooting percentage could actually probably be a little bit higher, and I wouldn't be too surprised either. Maybe the IPP. A couple of these metrics could be a touch higher, and that wouldn't surprise me and get back to where I thought he'd be at the start of the season. So overall, I think, yeah, this is just kind of who RNH is. He's not the guy who drives it, so sometimes he has these cold stretches that the absolute top guys in Edmonton just don't have. So I don't think really anything has changed in my evaluation of RNH at this point. Speaking of points, Braden Point.
Oh
Oh,
my
my
God.
best segue yet.
That's incredible. Just blew my mind.
5 shots in 3 games since returning from the All-Star break and 0 points to show for it. Now, on the season, Point is on pace for 39 goals, 84 points. Feels like a little bit ho-hum for Braden Point, who, that's probably about where you think he might be, but he's also had some big seasons, 50-goal seasons and stuff like this in the past as well. What do you think, Blake? Is this a fair assessment of where he should be at? And, these 3 games are just a little bit of regression pointing him in the right direction, or do you expect something different?
Again, this is very similar to RNH to me. Like, this is kind of what I think we should expect from Braden Point. 95 points last year, while nice, I mean, that was crazy. Like, he had a shooting percentage of almost 22 on the season in 82 games. Again, who does he think he is? Kuzmenko in his prime? No. All right, nobody is. All right, but when you're shooting 22% on the season, yeah, that's going to regress. And he's still shooting 17.5% this year. So I think this is a nice place to be. Like, in 2021, he had 58 points in 66 games. That's where the next year we knew he was going to be gotten at value, right? And then he popped off for 50 goals. And then, this season, in draft season, he was being overdrafted, right? Like, because he was just redlining last year. So I think it's somewhere in between, 2021 where he paced for 72 points, 2022, 95 points. Where he lands is in the middle, which is 84 points. And I think that's absolutely reasonable with a little bit of ceiling because he has access to, probably the best power play player in the game in Nikita Kucherov, and he's on that unit with him and at even strength, and he gets a crap ton of ice time. So yeah, 3 games without a point, not a big deal for me with Braden Point, especially with some of the metrics going on, like the scoring chance metrics, the on ice metrics, which I know you get into. I'm not concerned at all for Braden Point. I think this is probably what we can expect.
Yep, I think that's fair. It's interesting with Braden Point because he's actually not a really good power play producer. He hovers around like a 50% IPP, which is really low for a player of this caliber, like a player that we think of as a point per game plus player in the NHL. And that's really what holds him back from actually having just like bonkers numbers, like 100-point seasons and stuff like that. The underlying metrics always look terrific. I had him projected for a 17.7% shooting percentage, which is
Oh
exactly
my.
what he's on for at the moment. So that part feels obviously pretty in line to me. He's actually getting a little bit more ice time than I thought he would. but that's kind of leveling out. I had this IPP a touch higher. I thought that, maybe it wouldn't be quite so bad on the power play this year, and it kind of has been, which maybe I should have expected. So, yeah, all that to say, I think this is probably who Point is. I had him for 92 points, pacing for 84, as I mentioned at the moment. So, yeah, in between those two numbers is probably where I'd expect him to live. And yeah, the 3 games for a player of this caliber, I'm going to have to see a lot more games than just 3 games coming off an All Star break for me to get seriously worried about Braden Point. Another player that I am actually a little bit worried about at this point is Tom Wilson. 4 games played since the All Star break here, has just 8 shots. It's not great. It's not terrible, but it's not great. So he has just, I don't know, forgotten how to score points, basically.
Yeah.
Earlier in the year, I was actually pretty into Tom Wilson. The underlying metrics were looking really good. He was scoring goals, doing everything, and it's really fallen off in a big way for Tom Wilson, now pacing for just 20 goals and 34 points on the season. What's your status on Wilson? Obviously, he's still attached to Ovechkin. Dylan Strome had a big week, which we'll talk about later for reasons that I'm sure you'd like to forget already, Blake.
Oh
But
God.
Tom Wilson is not getting in on any of that at the moment. And do we think that there's room for him to get back up there? Like, what's your temperature on Wilson? Like, I'm thinking of, I think like 34-point pace. This guy's been dropped in a lot of points leagues at this point.
Yep.
If you're hanging on to Tom Wilson in a points league, you're probably sleeping. But in like a bangers cats where he has obviously more appeal, do you think he's even approaching drop status in a league like that?
Yeah, weirdly. I mean, it almost feels like the tale of 2 seasons here. Like he's fallen off in an extreme way, right? Starting with the shooting percentage, like he's actually a pretty efficient shooter. 3 straight seasons of almost 16%, and then now he's shooting only 10% this season, 9.8 actually. But yeah, I mean the hits are still there, but they haven't really been there that much recently. Like that's what you need from him at this point if he's not scoring, and he's not even getting a sniff, right? Like he's invisible out there. So it's hard to explain. Actually, it's hard to really pinpoint. But I know in the game today against the Canucks, like he wasn't even playing with Ovechkin. He was playing with Pacioretty and Scarbosa. Cool name. Sounds like a supervillain. Scarbosa. You got to say it like that. I don't know, but yeah, this is a player that it's a drop for me. This guy's a drop in bangers leagues. You're holding on, but it doesn't feel good, right? Like because he's not even getting a sniff of offense, and he's not really doing what you want him to do, which is get penalty minutes. He's not even doing that. So I don't know. It's hard to say. I don't know what's happened to this guy. He signed a big contract, and I think he had some juice kind of coming into the season, and he was getting featured a little bit. Just this Washington team in general. Where are you at with them, Nate? Because they are. I was surprised for a long time they were even in a playoff picture. Like they're out of it now, or out of that picture, but they're just such a boring team. They're having a hard time generating offense. They got one of the best offensive players in the world. What do you see with Washington this year, and Wilson in particular?
Yeah, with Washington in general, I think that they've had distributors down the middle for a long time to really feed Ovechkin, and they haven't really had that this year. I think Strom is developing in that regard and developing some chemistry with Ovechkin in that regard, and hopefully that continues for both of their sakes. Um, but I think that definitely that strength down the middle has really gone away, and that's really tough. It's really tough to be a good competitive team in the NHL if you don't have centers that can handle big minutes down the middle and, yeah, just set the table for the rest of the team in that way. Tom Wilson, I think there's a good chance there's some underlying injury going on
Gotta be.
here. That feels like a pretty solid chance to me at this point. As if this deployment sticks down the lineup with Scarbosa and Pacioretty, I'm actually kind of in on Pacioretty, but he's on the top power
Yeah,
play.
me too.
Wilson has not really been on the top power play for quite some time at this point, and if he's not attached to Ovechkin, then I'm really losing interest very fast in Tom Wilson. So I think he could even be trending towards a drop in Bangers Cats if this continues. Another player useful in Bangers Cats, Sam Bennett, and he's not been quite so useful as of late. It's been, like Florida's been great. His
Yeah.
line mate Matt Tkachuk has been great, but Sam Bennett, even going back before the All Star break, he's pointless in 4 straight. Only has 5 shots across those 4 games. Still been throwing the body and blocking some shots, so he's been doing that for you. But just 14 minutes, 48 seconds in the 4-0 win against Colorado. What do we do with Sam Bennett at this point? Like, it wasn't that long ago he was your streamer of the week and popping off, and everything was looking
Mhm.
rosy. And now all of a sudden, the shots have dried up a little bit, and he's not getting in on any of these points that Florida's putting up. What's your thought?
Yeah, that's the really concerning part for me. I'll hold Bennett through hell and high water if he's continuing to get his shots and chances. But in the last 5 games, like you said, like it's not great. Yeah, his shots, he's 200th overall in the league in the last 5 games. His shots over 60. Chances are still there. He's 30th overall in chances, so that's great. But I don't know. It hasn't been a good look, right? And they have so many weapons on Florida. It's like you can see how a player like this and some other players on the team, which we may talk about, sort of fall by the wayside, right? They're getting these third assists, fourth assists while these other guys cook and get all the points, right? But I don't like the lack of shots that Sam Bennett's bringing to the table. This isn't a Tom Wilson situation though with Sam Bennett. To me, he's still bringing the periffs. And he's next up on the power play if they decide to, change it up there. And he's still getting reasonable deployment, but I don't know. Yeah, I've got him on my couple team. I am considering dropping him because I need a streamer spot, and he just hasn't been doing anything. So if I wouldn't blame you if you drop him. I think he's better than what he's showing here. Maybe after next week we can look at him again and just be like, yeah, have the shots come back, because if not, smell you later, buddy.
Yeah, I think that's a fair take. Bennett's always been a little bit up and down. He's never been a guy who has a super high IPP. Getting exposure to Chuck is obviously a great thing, but he's never really been that guy. He's been a volume shooter, a little bit like Evan Rodriguez in that sense, or he's just kind of like a big time volume shooter, provides peripherally with the hits and the blocks and all the rest of it. But yeah, he's definitely going to have down periods and up periods. The ice time being down is maybe a little bit concerning, but overall, as long as he's still attached to Chuck at 5v5, I'm probably comfortable hanging on, unless, it's a really bad schedule for Florida and he is legitimately the last player on my roster. All right, next up we got Gabe Vilardi, moved down the lineup in the last game off the top line. Nikolai Ehlers replacing him with Scheifele and Connor there, and he takes Ehlers' spot on the Monahan Perfetti line. Still on the top power play in the last game here. But definitely Velarde's metrics have taken a turn for the worse as of late. Early in the season, where everything was going terrifically, the individual scoring chances for, in particular, were just off the charts, popping top 20 in the NHL kind of numbers. And that's really fallen off now. Still on a 30-goal, 55-point pace on the season. But if he's not going to be getting that top line exposure, what are we thinking about Velarde moving forward?
I think he's still rosterable, right? He's top power play. That's really what's holding his floor up. If he gets moved off top power play, he's a drop for me. But I'm holding on. If I don't have Velarde anywhere, but I would hold on if as long as he's on that top power play. But I don't know. This is just again, it's just not a player I'm ever going to get excited about. Like he did have a great start, and now he's still just pacing for 55 points. He was on a 53-point pace last season. Like, this might be kind of the player he is currently, right? He's only 24, but I don't know. It's another guy that lives on efficiency, right? 15.3% shooting percentage this year, 18.9 last year. Those are high numbers, right? So he doesn't generate a lot of shots or chances. So what happens when the goals stop going in, right? The luck metrics go down. He's going to fall off a cliff. And it looks like that's sort of what's happened here. Plus, Rick Bowness, I don't know what the hell is going on there. You don't know what you're getting game to game. Like Gabe Vilardi, if he was getting 20 minutes a night, this guy could really pop, right? I mean, same with Ehlers, but it's not happening, right? So it's just not a player I'm excited about. Streamer with benefits at this point. His floor is solid if he stays on power play 1. My 2 cents.
Yeah, I think that's a fair take. If you look across the last 4 games, going back even before the All-Star break, has just 2 shots in those 4 games.
Yes.
One hit, one block across those 4 games, like literally doing nothing for you fantasy wise. And down to just 13 minutes, 5 seconds in that 2-1 win against Pittsburgh on
Yep.
Saturday. That's really scary to me with Velarde, is that there's literally nothing going on. He's not generating anything, and the ice time is starting to decline to match that. So yeah, I if he's off power play one, he's absolutely a drop. I think you can definitely make the case to drop him right now, and I don't think that's too crazy. I do think the upside is still there, though. Like, I kind of believe that the stretch they had earlier in the season, generating pretty solid individual scoring chances for, was legit. Like, it's pretty hard to do what he did early in the season and sustain it for the length of time that he is able to do it. So I do kind of think that there is a player here. He just may not be the most consistent player. And with a coach like Rick Bowness, this probably isn't the time of year that you can really be hanging on and just waiting and hoping and praying that things turn around. There's probably in most leagues somebody out there that's actually worth, taking the stab and just kind of getting rid of the opportunity cost of hanging on to a guy like Velarde at the moment. A couple of defensemen that I want to touch on here. So, yes, Brandon Montour still have not. I don't know what I can say about Brandon Montour that hasn't already been said. This is quite possibly the worst cold streak that I've ever seen from a player in terms of point production versus the underlying metrics. Just the length of time that it's gone on for. The underlying metrics are still like mind-bogglingly good, like leading
Yep.
the league on the season in on-ice Corsi for, fourth amongst all defensemen in on-ice scoring chances for. The individual metrics not far behind, getting 23 minutes a night, and somehow he's still only pacing for 25 points on the season through 36 games played now. Yeah, just absolutely wild that Montour has not scored more points. Yeah, if you can, I'm still sending out offers for him. I have one league in particular where I've been bothering the manager in my league for Montour and sending him offers constantly, and he keeps sending me back offers for my stars for Montour. So I can tell he doesn't want to trade me Montour, but
Or he listens to the pod, hey Nate?
yeah, that could be it too. But yeah, definitely is still a player that I want to be rostering because yeah, the underlying metrics cannot lie when they're this good for this long, basically. So that's Montour take. I don't think you would disagree with anything there, Blake. So let's talk about the other two guys who are actually of some interest. That's Devon Taves and Luke Hughes. And these guys actually look really similar on the season if you start to break it down. 12 goal, 45 point pace for Devon Taves, and a 13 goal, 43 point pace for Luke Hughes on the season. Now, neither of these guys have been very good as of late. Devon Taves in the 4 games since the All Star break, 0 points. 3 games since the All Star break for Luke Hughes, 0 points. Taves has been shooting a little bit, 11 shots in those 4 games. Luke Hughes is not, only 3 shots in those 3 games. What's your take on these two here, Blake? Compare and contrast. Who would you rather have? Is there redeeming factors for either of these guys? Are you thinking about dropping either of these guys at this point?
Yeah. I mean, I have Luke Hughes on my couple team, and I've been wanting to drop him for a long time, but schedule hasn't really allowed me to, and his ice time hasn't really allowed me to either. And Jack Hughes is back now, and Luke Hughes is the quarterback on power play one, so I can't, in good conscience, drop Luke Hughes yet. But what he's showing me is a player that should probably be dropped, right? But I'm going to hold on. I'm going to hold on for probably another week and see what's going on, like, while Jack Hughes gets his legs. But this is an interesting comparison, isn't it? Devon Taves and Luke Hughes are kind of pacing for the same thing. I think, like, Devon Taves was drafted, right? Whereas Luke Hughes, you might have got him off the waiver wire or, picked him up with one of your last picks. So I think you're probably pretty pissed if you drafted Devon Taves, even though, like, he's on a 45-point pace. He only got 50 points last year. He's not that far off of what he's done, although he is kind of like, his shooting percentage is almost double what it was last year. He already has 8 goals after just 7 last year. So there's some interesting things with Taves, but what can we expect? He's behind Cale Makar in the pecking order. So I don't expect a big offense from Taves. He's like one of these boring fantasy contributors like you want on your team because he's good to go. He's going to play a ton of minutes. He's access to great players, but we can't expect the world from this guy. Luke Hughes, for me, there's a little bit more expectation there just because he is quarterback in that New Jersey power play, which at one point of this year was the number one power play in the league, right? Until Jack Hughes got injured. So I'm kind of holding out for that to see what Hughes is looking like. But yeah, I mean, if we're getting close to crunch time, right? We talked about this in one of our last pods. Like, you got to be ruthless. You got to be cutthroat. So these are both players. Like, if it doesn't work for your team and you can pick up a player that is going to benefit your team, you do it. I don't think either of these players are like hold at all costs. Certainly not Luke Hughes.
I think that's a fair point. Yeah, I think Luke Hughes, he's got the Monday, Tuesday this week. I picked him up in one spot where he had been dropped for the Monday, Tuesday. And honestly, I'm probably going to drop him right away after
Yeah.
that. I'm not really thinking that I'm going to hang on to him beyond that point. Um, Devon Taves, like the thing with Taves, we talk about this with a lot of defensemen. The upside there is that in the event of a Makar injury, that Devon Taves goes up to the top power play unit and just crushes for the rest of the season
Yeah.
and goes like 60 plus point pace rest of season. And meanwhile, he's not really hurting you. Yeah, in this stretch in particular, he's hurting you, but we still see the season long point pace. We feel like we know what to expect from Taves. You mentioned the shooting percentage. That doesn't really concern me that much. He's been historically a high shooting percentage player. Last year was more of an anomaly than this year, in my opinion, in that regard. So I'm not too worried about that. I think Taves is a solid, just a solid player. Luke Hughes, the thing with Hughes that obviously interests you is that exposure. Like, even the on ice stats on the season, 12th in Corsi 4 per
Yeah.
60 and scoring chances 4 per 60. So the on ice stats look really good there. He's been getting way more minutes as of late. In these 3 games, he's been skating 25 minutes a night. So that part, obviously, just by virtue of being on the ice more, there's a chance that he runs into some more points. But the like the individual metrics, the shooting just falling off a cliff is pretty concerning. So right now, I view Luke Hughes more as a streamer, and I would still consider Taves to be a hold personally. All right. Well, if we did not talk about a player that you wanted to hear about, make sure you join me for the Monday night 8 p.m. EST live stream where I talk about all the puzzling players. Another feature of the Apples and Genos Discord server is that you'll get notified when I'm looking for the puzzling players to talk about. I'll send that out usually somewhere around noon on Mondays, and everybody can reply to that post and give me their puzzling players, and the ones that get the most upvotes are the ones that I end up talking about here on the stream. Even if you don't get to that, you can join me on YouTube for the live stream and ask your questions in the chat there, and usually I'm able to get to most of those, so definitely join me for that if you didn't get your guy talked about here. All right, Blake, we got to move on. Talk about the player that's looking good under the hood. And that for me is going to be Sean Couturier. We've mentioned Couturier a few times. In the last 9 games here, he's only got a goal and a couple assists, still averaging 1846. We talk about the Torts effect and how he likes to kind of yank guys' chains a lot and move them around. Atkinson got like a 10-minute game the other night after skating like 18 minutes for a bunch of games in a row. And likes to do that with players. One player that he dares not do that with is Sean Couturier, and with good reason. This is a guy who deserves all the respect that he gets. He's absolute ice tilter in terms of the underlying metrics. Yeah, just came back from really serious injuries to be immediately, once again, one of the best two-way centers in the entire NHL, in my estimation. 12.1 shots per 60 in the last 9 games, which is incredible stuff. 16th in the league during that stretch. 91.2 on ice Corsi 4 per 60. That number might not mean too much to you, but it's second in the entire league during this stretch, only to Matthew Tkachuk. That's pretty good stuff. 58th in on ice scoring chances 4 per 60, so the scoring chances are there as well. On the season, pacing for just 18 goals, 54 points, and I think that's really kind of the absolute bare minimum that Couturier could possibly provide for the rest of the season. 51% IPP, 7.5% shooting percentage, 10.1% on ice shooting percentage. I think he rebounds across all those categories for the rest of the season. I think he's got 60, 65 easily, and potential for even more. I could see potential for a 70 plus point pace rest of season from here on out. What's your thoughts on Couturier? Do you agree with me that he's a little bit torts proof?
Yeah, well, that's an interesting piece. I yes, the short answer is yes, but they had an interesting altercation in the last little game there, or not an altercation, but oh yeah, it was, I guess. So Torts was pissed at him for something like a missed back check or something, but he was giving it to him on the bench, right? Typical Torts style. Sean Couturier, like this, this like he should be Torts proof, right? This guy's come back, he's crushing, but and then he goes out and gets the game winner in that game and had a little bit of a an extra celebration there. And I read something that Torts said. He was saying that, yeah, that was like a big fu to me. His celebration was like an fu to me, but Torts was there for it. He was kind of happy for the guy, but he also called Couturier a crusty old veteran. So like they have kind of an interesting dynamic. But yeah, short answer is yes. I think that like Torts has to lean on this guy if they want to win. And Philly's been playing really well since the All-Star break. So I do think that Couturier has a bit more headroom, right? He's underachieving in some of the luck metrics, but everything under the hood looking awesome.
Okay. I Yeah, I mean, as far as that particular incident goes, I I think that's just too like
Yep.
energetic, passionate people
Yep.
kind of going at it a little bit. I don't think I want to read too much into that. Like he still played him in all the key situations. It's
Right.
not like he sat him the way that he's been wont to do with other players. So I just kind of read that as two guys getting after it, and it'll probably be forgotten by the next time they take the ice, in my opinion, unless we see something different in the ice time. That's how I'd read that. All right, let's talk some move of the week. So for myself here, I was pretty disciplined, and I want to say that this is something that you got to practice. I know you've talked a little bit this year, Blake, about not being so disciplined at times as you've wanted to be, and that's something you've been trying to get better at.
Yep.
But I was able to hold myself to 3 ads across all my leagues before the Saturday heavy game here, or heavy game slate rather. And I didn't waste, the temptation is always to waste an ad on a prayer for just like one massive game that swings your matchup that you're losing already by like 20 points, and you'd have to have that player score like, I don't know, 3 goals for it to work out for you. So in those cases, I was able to resist that temptation, got myself set up for this week upcoming, which is again not great for streaming. We've talked about that. Obviously, Arizona, the one team, but if you don't get the top guys there, it's kind of really tough to pick out the one player who's gonna absolutely go off for you this week, if any go off. So I would just say like discipline is key in these situations, right? If there's not a move to be made, you don't need to make the move. And that is the move of the week, to just not make a move sometimes when there's not a move to be made, and to hang on and just find yourself what is actually best for your team, not only for this week, but for the rest of the season. If you're not going to significantly impact your matchup in any way, shape, or form, then you should definitely be looking ahead to the following matchup and be, yeah, just setting yourself up for the best possible position moving forward. Any thoughts there, Blake?
Yeah, absolutely. I've been doing better, and I saw what you wrote here, and I did that in a couple of my leagues, and I was happy with myself. Like one matchup where I didn't win, but I was able to hold a move, and I made a move for my next week on the Sunday, so that worked out really well. And then one I did win, and then I was able to make a move for next week, so that was great. My move for myself this week, nothing crazy, but I was able to get another trade done in our experts league that Nate and I are in together. I'm basically just selling off any pick that I have, trying to get really good roster players. I was able to secure that long-necked beauty, chicken necks, Chris Kreider, for the Coiler, Charlie Coyle, and a pick swap, a round 6 pick I had to give up, and I took a round 10 pick back. So pretty damn nice. I mean, Kreider has been on fire. This guy's got 2 7-shot games in the last 3 games. I love it. So yeah, things are falling into place. I'm tied for first place in our experts league. That's actually my strongest league, weirdly. So against really good fantasy players. So I'm it's a low key brag, but we have our own podcast, so I have to do that. So there you go.
Fair enough. Fair enough. All right. Well, let's continue with the bragging. And why
Oh
don't you
God.
tell us about the head-to-head streamer deathmatch and how that turned out for you this week, Blake?
Well, buddy, I'm an avid listener to Nate's podcast and Apples and Genos, and he was telling me about this guy, Ross Cameo Colton, and I just took him at his word. He said that Ross Colton was the man, and so I picked him for my streamer, and it didn't really work out. Some guy named Dylan Strome took care of business. Oh, my God. They took Colton off the top power play. That was my problem right there. That's, but whatever. I got Lekkinen in a bunch of spots, so I'm happy with that. But yeah, kudos to you, buddy. But it only matters who wins in the end. All right. And I know I'll be there. All right. So
All right. Yeah, so in the end, it was Dylan Strome netting 22.5 couple points, had a goal and 3 assists across his 4 games. Colton went pointless, did register 8 couple points. Obviously, he provides some shots, hits, blocks, all those sorts of things, no matter what. But this week, we've got Nick Schmaltz versus Quentin Byfield, so that should be fun. Yeah, hoping my guy Nicky comes through for me this week. Was unable to do so before due to some injury, but I'm placing all my faith back in the man Nick Schmaltz. So we'll see, obviously, how that goes this week, but I have faith. All right. So yeah, on the season we're tied up 8-8. Like this is looking like it's gonna be down to the bitter end.
Barn
And
burner.
I wouldn't have it any other way. Should be fun. It's been a fun little mini game for us throughout the season this year. All right. Well, that's all we've got for this episode. Hopefully, it brought you some value, helped you get a little bit better at fantasy hockey today. All the advanced stats you heard today came from Natural Stat Trick, which is a terrific free resource. Many thanks to the band They're There for supplying the music for the podcast. Be sure to check out their Spotify as well. And that's it, folks. Much love.